Unless you planned on spending thousands of dollars on a rare vinyl copy of the Black Album, there's no need to pay a fee to listen to Cindy C., the song we'll be discussing on this episode of the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. And joining me on this episode, again, is Rhonda Nicole. Welcome back to the show, Rhonda.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm excited to be here today.
Great. I'm excited to have you because we're at the Black Album now, and although it wasn't released in 1987 the way it was originally planned, this is how I'm covering this album and the songs on the album because for me these songs very much sound and have a distinct 80s vibe to them, and I just have to talk about them while I'm in the decade. So that's why we're here today to talk about the second song off of the Black Album, Cindy C. You and I were last collaborated during the Sign of the Times. We did Play in the Sunshine together. That's a fun song. Cindy C's fun, but it has some of the lyrics are a little more, I don't know, I wouldn't say darker, but definitely have a bit more of an edge to them than Play in the Sunshine.
Yes.
A little bit more of a sexual edge too. Certainly lines that we'll get to as we start going through the lyrics, but it's for you, Rhonda. So I've been asking this question of other guests, and I will be future guests of the Black Album era episodes. Do you have like an own personal story related to this album, how you first heard it, how you came across it? And if you do, I would love to hear it, and so I'm sure the listeners would as well.
Yes, actually. So as you and I have discussed before, we're around the same age. So one of the cool things about a lot of these conversations that you're leading is that we're talking about music that we experienced in real time at a certain age. And with the Black Album, I was in 7th grade, I believe. And I had a friend, 2 friends, actually, they are brothers, whose father was one of the most popular radio show hosts in Dallas. That would be, for your listeners, there was a radio station, the urban radio station in Dallas that kind of ruled that time period in the 80s was K104, KKDA FM, and Tom Joyner, who went on to be one of the most celebrated nationally syndicated hosts of radio, was the morning show host at that time. And so I went to school with Tom's sons, Oscar and Thomas. Oscar and I were in the same class. Thomas was a year ahead. And Tom on the air kept talking about the Black Album. I mean, people knew about it because, you know, as you've probably already discussed, there were some preview pressings that went out before Prince was able to, you know, hit stop on everything. So radio got things, you know, some record stores got things.
Yeah, some promo copies floating around.
Yeah, so industry folks, so people had it, right? So Tom was talking about it on the air and, you know, basically not only talking about just the fact that he had it, but the fact that he couldn't play any of it on the show. And so I was able to borrow it. So basically, Oscar got it from his dad. I don't remember whether he got it with his dad's permission or not, but he brought it to me at school. I smuggled it home thinking that my mom would surely know. My mom had no clue. But at that time, I thought that she, you know, because she listened to the radio too. So I thought, oh my God, she's going to see this Black album, literally this Black album sleeve in my book bag, and she's going to go nuts. So I smuggled it home, and then I made a tape of it on my record player. And the tape that I used, because I didn't have any blank tapes in my room, so I took one of my sisters that she had recorded. My sister's 10 years older than I. So I took one of my sister's, you know, like Maxell tapes or whatever, and she had recorded a Bob James album on it. And so I recorded the Black Album over that. Never said anything to her. I just took the tape. And then I gave, you know, Oscar his album back. But the way that I kept it hidden, if you will, was Bob James. So I could always know that that was the Black Album because of Bob George, and it just said Bob James, and nobody knew. No one was
Apparently your
alive
sister
there.
didn't mind either, and she never found out.
She never found out. So either she never looked for that tape again, or she just assumed she'd lost it. And I think back in the day, when we all had so many cassettes laying around, we probably lost a lot of stuff. So that was my Black Album experience, in 87, 88, whenever that was. Excuse me. And then, of course, when they released it in the 90s, I got it on CD. But by that time, I was like, this is just to kind of have an official copy and not because I thought I was going to experience anything new with the music at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty cool, I have to say, because I would consider you very fortunate to have a friend who had somebody with a copy, because there were people spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on bootleg copies, I imagine, back in the day, or at least doing, going through nefarious means to access this album. Or you had to know somebody who knew somebody. I guess in this case, you knew somebody who knew somebody. So that's how you were able to get it.
And it was interesting, too, because I remember looking at the album artwork, which, of course, there wasn't technically any. It's just a black sleeve. But then the sleeve itself was matte, but there was this shiny image, if you will, in the middle of it. And it was from one of the, parade Cherry Moon photo outtakes. So that was weird. It's like, wait. And of course, again, at that time, I had no understanding of how, Prince worked or how records worked, like any of that kind of stuff. And of course, it wasn't until much, much later that I understood that basically the album was going to be released with no name, no title, no attribution to the artist, and no artwork. And so I think that I don't know how whoever came with the idea to put, this sort of secret image of Prince from a Cherry Moon photo moment in it. But it was, again, very, very strange, but very cool at the same time.
Yeah, because that image didn't find its way on the official 94 release.
Not at all. It literally is just black paper.
Yep.
So
that's a pretty rare copy, if it has, or rare copies to have that image on it, for sure. If it's legit, and not just a bootleg recreation. Okay, well, that is, again, like I said, a very cool story. You were hearing it in real time, just like Prince had originally intended, instead of me listening to it for the first time in 1994 and thinking, "Wow, this sounds pretty dated." It's not as cool as everybody said it. The infamous Black Album. I remember, the having a reputation. Let's put it that way. And by 1994, that it just didn't have the same luster attached to it. So awesome for that. And then Cindy C, did you remember liking that song? Remember even knowing that it was about the model, Cindy Crawford, who I guess in 1987, 88, she was a supermodel, but she had not really crossed over to, mainstream in terms of like television and movies much yet.
I don't think I knew at that point that it was about Cindy Crawford. I liked the song. I actually remember doing a dance routine to it because I was really into dance in the junior high, middle school, early high school years. So the first time I remember there being a reference made to Cindy Crawford, I was in high school, so early 90s. So a few years after I'd had the album, and somebody just I remember a friend of mine was like, that song's about Cindy Crawford. But again, this is pre-internet. This is, still a lot of mystery around the artists that we listen to and the entertainers that we have, fascinations around. So, I was like, oh, that's cool. But I didn't know, I never really knew for sure. And then, much, much later on, with that little tidbit of information, I started listening to the song differently. And I was like, oh, well, I can kind of hear some references. But at the time when I first got it, I definitely did not put that together. I don't think that she was really part of my larger consciousness at that point, earlier on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And right, once you kind of unlock a key, pun intended, once you unlock a key to this song and knowing who it's about, even though it's not super coded, but it's at the same time, if that person that Prince is singing about isn't a part of your world, it isn't going to click in the same way that it would after the fact. And as we go through the lyrics, it becomes pretty obvious. But I have to admit as well, because when I first heard it, even in 1994, because the internet still wasn't a thing, and I wasn't, or if it was not something that I was really checking for a whole lot in 94 and using. I didn't. I just thought it was a song about, a woman, just some arbitrary, random woman named Cindy that Prince was kind of lusting after. So yeah, it took a little bit for me as well. So definitely don't feel like you missed the boat on that one. I think a lot of us did.
For sure.
Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to kind of relate the story, how it's been told by Cindy herself, Miss Crawford. She told the story after Prince's passing about how she met Prince and how she believes, or in her opinion, the origin of the story came from, or the origin of the song, I should say, came from a chance meeting at a New York City dance floor at a club. I think she said it was called Nell's or something like that. And the way she says it, she was dancing with her friends. She was in New York City, 86, 87, dancing with her friends. And I'll use her quote, a littler man came up and started dancing with her. And she's like, oh, wow, that's Prince, because obviously by 86, 87, he was a megastar and she was just an up and coming model. And she doesn't really mention anything about him, hitting on her a whole lot, or, asking her to come home with him, or just anything really forward. She doesn't suggest that a whole lot, just like he danced with her and she thought it was cool, and then kind of, he went away and went back to wherever he was, whoever else he was hanging out with. And then to come to find out later, she said, as she tells the story, that, he wrote a song called Cindy C, and it was about her. I think there was a rumor about a story going around how this song was kind of formed based off of a different story about Prince and Cindy meeting in Paris, and then he asked her out or something like that, or asked her to hang out with him that night, and she said no. But I think that time has kind of erased that part of the story. And so that's the way I understand it, is that the Paris story may not have been true, and it was more likely the New York story, but that's really just coming from Cindy. I don't know if you've heard any other stories, Rhonda, besides that one.
No, I haven't. Other than, like you said, kind of just rumors, that, Prince asked her out, or wanted this, wanted that. But, I tend to try to let the people who are actually in the moment be the arbiters of the truth of the moment. And obviously, Cindy sharing that story after Prince's passing, I can't see why, if there had been anything more to it, why she would have not shared that, right? So not necessarily to be scandalous, but just to provide more context or to tell her story. So I definitely was familiar, again, much, much later on, after Prince's passing, with Cindy's version of events, that, he just kind of started dancing with her on the dance floor. And I think that, if we think about Prince as a songwriter, it's fair to say that he was inspired by a lot of different things, and some things are very deeply autobiographical, and other things may just be composites of different experiences or moments or thoughts. So, you can't necessarily listen to the song and think that it's just, this linear through line, so it's, you dance with Cindy C, and now here's a little fun, little funky ditty about it that does kind of, leave some things open to interpretation, but I feel like Cindy's account of what happened is probably what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with that as well, because again, all the other stories have just been rumors. They really haven't been, as far as I can tell, founded by any anecdotal evidence or stories told by people who were there.
Right.
Was anybody at that Paris club that this allegedly happened, where he hit on her and she rebuffed him? I don't know. Somebody needs to come forward and admit so, to provide, again, another story to go along with this song. But right. For all as far as I know, all we have is Cindy's account, because Prince wasn't, again, one to really kind of explain his songs. That wasn't his thing, and which is fine. But yeah. I think a lot of people probably jumped to conclusions or wanted to start the rumors that it was something more than that, because the lyrics of the song kind of paint maybe a little more of a negative picture about like their interaction. Like it was, Prince does sound a little upset, maybe a little, almost a little deranged in some aspects. So I always kind of felt like this, like Prince said the Black Album was evil, and he didn't want it to be the last thing people heard. It was dark, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, it's not every song on this album isn't like that. I don't feel like the song that I just recorded, previously, La Grind, has a lot of darkness to it. People really obviously point to Bob George clearly, because that has some domestic violence, and he's speaking in a much lower tone that he eventually went called Spooky Electric. But I think Cindy C could be one of those songs that he also was referring to when he thought that this album was maybe a little too dark or evil, because he's kind of mean in this song.
Yeah,
he's kind of mean,
for sure. It's not necessarily a complimentary song.
yeah.
Like,
I mean, if you're just
Prince is
looking
going to
at
write
it,
a song about you, that might not be the one you want.
yeah, if you're just looking at it from the standpoint like, oh, I'm flattered he wrote a song about me, great. Don't listen to the lyrics too closely, though. Which I know she has. I mean, she claims that she knows, she had that Black Album and knows the song very well. So obviously she's heard the lyrics. But yeah, it's not always so complimentary in terms of the language he uses and some of the crude imagery he portrays and presents here. So I think if you're ready, let's go through the lyrics, because I kind of want to get through some of these aspects of the song that are a little bit more troublesome, or problematic, I guess you would say today.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they weren't so much in 86, 87, but even Prince must have felt like, yeah, maybe I crossed the line a little bit on that song. And this is one of the pieces, or one of the reasons why he chose to pull the Black Album. It couldn't have just been because of Bob George.
Sure.
All right, so the first verse of the song. This song's about a high-class model over in Paris, France. If I get a camera, tell me, will you dance? If I take a picture in the middle of the night, will you fuck with me? Sugar, say it's all right. Come on. And okay, so I read the lyrics that are on the internet where he says, will you fuck with me? But I honestly don't know for a fact that he says that. Because it sounds like funk, too. And this could be another Erotic City funk or fuck. I don't know. So I just read it that way. I'm putting that out there right now. If anybody else has ever like, oh, I didn't know he said the F word in the song. I don't know for a fact that he does either. So just laying that out there right off the bat. Okay, so this first verse, Rhonda, I think it's pretty clear. High-class model, Paris, France. And this is another example why maybe people cited that Paris location for their interaction, because he mentions Paris right there in the second line of the song about a high-class model in Paris, France. I mean, Cindy's not from Paris. She's not French. She's from Illinois, She's from like a Chicago suburb. Midwestern girl, just like Prince is a Midwestern boy. So, but I mean, I'm sure she traveled a lot to Paris.
Sure.
Early in her career, and so he might have become aware of her when he was over in Paris in 85, 86 for Under the Cherry Moon, and he was doing all that work for that recording. I mean, this recording was, according to Princeville, in spring of 87.
Right.
But he could have wrote the song, at least the lyrics, if nothing else, before that. So, yeah. So, like with the first verse, Rhonda, like, what do you find interesting here?
Obviously, the reference to Paris, and one of the things that I was kind of kicking around in my head is that there is a lot of lore from people who were part of Prince's camp around that time, Jerome, Wally, etc., where they talk about, all the girls in Paris that they used to chase and so forth when they were over there shooting Cherry Moon. So it's not impossible that, again, he might have been literally referencing Cindy, or he may have been referencing any number of other women that he met during that particular time in his life when he was in Paris and in other parts of France, and, obviously enjoying being a young man with a lot of money and a lot of access and fame and so forth, and having, beautiful women available to him. But yeah, I think that to your point about, whether or not he says the F word or if it's funk or what have you, I love the fact that with Prince's music, that word comes up a lot. And sometimes it sounds like he's saying F-U-N-K, and sometimes it sounds like he's saying F-U-C-K, and sometimes he's alternating them. And I think that, to me, it feels like Prince kind of used those words almost interchangeably, like they almost have a very similar meaning to him. But I think in the context of the Black Album, especially as this song is sequenced after Le Grind, it probably is F-U-C-K.
Yeah, yeah. He definitely dropped some F-bombs in the grind as well, and for the rest of the album here and there.
Yeah.
So he wasn't afraid. I mean, he was. Yeah, this album would have gotten a parental advisory sticker. I'm certain of it if it was going to get released. I know they were still kind of fleshing that out in 1987. They didn't have like the consistent parental advisory explicit lyrics stickers that you would find after a certain time, where they all became very homogenous and they looked exactly the same. There was a variety of them, but I can imagine this album would have been slap with one of those hardcore, as long as you could hear what he was saying. Like in this song, you could always plead ignorance, like, no, I said funk. You can't prove me otherwise. But Bob George, no, it's pretty clear that he says the F word there. Yeah, so like even the model, just the fact that he says high class models in Paris, France, to your point, yes, he could have been meeting lots of different women over there and having, parties and hanging out with other high class models. It doesn't have to be specifically Cindy. And that's why I think there's definitely some weight to your statement that, or at least the assertion that, as a songwriter, Prince often would take inspiration from a lot of different things and then mold it together and give us a song about it. So he could have been hanging out with quote unquote high class models in Paris, France with his boys. Didn't have to be Cindy. And then, later he's going to be singing more specifically about this particular high class model. So yeah, it's just one of those things where it could be a little bit of truth, a little bit of fiction, and a little bit of artistic license for sure. Tell me, will you dance? If I take a picture in the middle of the night. So the picture line, again, just kind of seems to refer to this person's career, models and cameras and taking a photo. That's basically what they do for a living. People take photos of them for a living. That's how they make their money. So just more references to kind of like the model life and him using that, in a clever way, because now he's not talking about necessarily, you're going to model for money. Now you're just going to model for me in the middle of the night, because
yes,
I think Prince kind of liked the idea of capturing some intimate moments on either camera or film in some form or fashion. And what he did, he mentions this in other songs before. So
yeah, and then later in 319, I mean, that's kind of the whole premise.
Yep.
There's definitely an element of taking a picture in the middle of the night that's very alluring and sexy, and it does point to intimacy. Obviously, if you're taking someone's picture in the middle of the night, well, not necessarily obviously, because some people are creepy, but you're there with them. Like there has already been, but at the same time, it does kind of leave the question, like, is she sleeping while you're taking this picture, or is she aware that you're taking these pictures? So definitely, again, an interesting lyric and an interesting visual to ponder.
Definitely, yeah. Could go either way depending on your perspective and depending on your thoughts on photos and whether or not they can be looked at as kind of a creep move or really kind of sexual and arousing and kind of fun. It just depends on the person, depends on the relationship, and depends on the moment. Okay, so that's the first verse of the song, and then basically we get the chorus after that, and the chorus. And I'll mention, what I'll do is I'll say the lines that Prince sings, but there's a lot of background vocals on this song
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of kind of echoes or additional lines that are being told in the background. So to avoid confusion, I'm just going to sing like the straightforward sections, and then I'll speak to the background. So Prince says, "Cindy C, will you play with me? Cindy C, I'll pay the fee." And in the background, you hear Cindy C, play with me. I will pay the usual fee. What's it going to be? Cindy C, play with me. I will pay the usual fee. What's it going to be? So they say that. I think it's Cat. I'm not 100% sure. I looked at Prince Vault, and there's a number of different women that are given background vocal credits on this song besides Cat. There's also Sheila and Bonnie Boyer
And Jill.
and Jill, even though it says uncredited, unconfirmed. So I'm like, I don't know. Who knows? But
It's everybody.
anybody who was there had a chance to sing on the song, apparently. So regardless of who's actually singing these lines, or if it's multiple women, um, this chorus mentions the play with me part and paying the fee part, and the paying the fee line is the one that I think is a little kind of rude in a way. I
Yeah.
think, unless somebody has an alternate take, but if somebody says I'll pay the fee for you to play with me, that implies some sort of level of prostitution.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it
and-
does. Which is
yeah,
strange.
it's just it's strange, but it's kind of biting. It's like if almost he's saying, and I'm guessing again, every time I say something like in these lyrics that sound a little bit sketchy or rude, it probably added these are the lines that added to the lore of the song, I would imagine. So, the tales that people told about how Prince and Cindy Crawford met and how she rebuffed him and said, "No, I don't want to hang out with you. I'm not interested." And kind of as a response, if somebody's hurt or angry, maybe they'll say, "Well, maybe you won't hang out with me for free, but if I pay you, will you?" Just kind of as a little bit of a dick move, or just somebody
Yeah.
who's hurt, somebody who wants to lash out. They can start, being hurtful in that way, because Cindy was starting to, gain some notoriety. She was on the cover of Vogue, which we'll talk about in the next in the next verse. So she was kind of becoming the it girl in terms of the modeling agent, or the modeling life, and in that respect, she wasn't as popular as him, but she was pretty young. She would have been about 20 around this time. Prince was still in his 20s, but later 20s, and I don't know, maybe maybe in her mind there was never really an opportunity to date, and Prince could have been using this as more of just like fantasy, writing these lyrics as kind of like an inspired fantasy, I suppose.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never really liked the chorus. Even when I was very young and heard it, it didn't sound kind.
Mm-hmm.
And that was for me at that point in my Prince listening. You had songs like "Darling Nikki" where he's a little aggressive, and other songs where he doesn't seem to be, irresistible bitch, which is not really hurtful necessarily, but it's definitely very raw and edgy. But this really kind of seemed like a dig, and I've wondered over the years, on the occasion that I listen to the song, because I don't listen to it a lot, if he's referring to how some supermodels, especially back in the 80s and 90s, like, I don't get out of bed for less than $10,000. So was he just kind of trying to be sarcastic and make a joke? Or did he really, to your point, was he really talking about paying her almost like she's an escort or, prostitute or what have you? It's bizarre. It's a really weird song. And I think that, as, from a musical standpoint, as kind of funky and, danceable as it is, lyrically, it's got a lot of question marks. And the
Yeah.
chorus is definitely a
Mm-hmm.
question mark, and again, is he really talking about Cindy Crawford in that sense, or is he just, again, kind of talking to any number or about any number of real or imagined experiences that he's just wanting to kind of put out there?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting the "Will You Play with Me" line because about a year prior, he had recorded that song with Miles Davis that showed up on the Sign of the Times Super Deluxe album
Yeah,
last year. "Can I Play with You?" And it's a little bit of a take on that. "Will you play with me? Can I play with you?" It's basically asking the same question just in a different way. Not he. It's not like he wrote these two songs or recorded these two songs at least back to back, where you would expect sometimes similar language to bleed into songs. As somebody who's covering his songs from a lyrical standpoint, I see that a lot. It's easy to know when a song was recorded approximately based on some of the unique language he uses. Based off of that, I would have almost expected this
definitely.
song to have been written earlier, which I guess it could have been. Again, Prince Vault is pretty vague on the writing. They don't really have
Right, right.
firm understanding of when the song was written. When it was recorded is not the same thing, of course. As you know, as a musician as well, you can write a song in 2010 and record it in 2021.
Right.
So, it's just interesting, the similarities between those two lines, and those lines by themselves are pretty innocuous. "Will you play with me" is just kind of another way of saying, will you engage me in conversation, or will you have sex? I mean, it could mean anything. Will you engage me in conversation to will you have sex with me, and anything in
Right.
between. It's so vague that it can be literally almost anything, just involving the two of them and whatever it is that they end up doing. And the lines in the background with the women saying, "What's it going to be? What's it going to be?" do seem a little aggressive too. Like she has to come up with an answer. Like they're pressuring her into responding. "What's it going to be? What's it going to be? Will you play with me? What's it going to be? I'll pay the usual fee." So that adds a little bit for me to kind of the pushy nature of this song.
Yeah. And we don't hear from Cindy in quotation marks. Like there doesn't ever seem to be, because in a lot of Prince's songs, he tells a story of, you know, the narrator and the object of affection, kind of having a back and forth. There's a dance. I think about the song, for example, My Medallion, which is, much, much older, or I guess much, much more recent, if you want to look at it
Yeah,
that way, where there's this very funny exchange between, him in theory, as the narrative voice, and the woman who steals his necklace and all this stuff that's happening. And it's just chaotic and hilarious. But here we don't hear from her, which is, I think, kind of unusual for Prince. Like he typically seems to tell a story where the characters involved are really part of the conversation, even if it's just representative and background vocals. And here it's almost like the background vocals are his wingmen or
yeah,
wingwomen. Like
yeah.
but it's not the person to whom he's speaking or referencing.
No, you're exactly right. That's what it feels like with the backing vocals. They sound like just people surrounding him, and that's why it feels like they're ganging up on her a
Yeah,
bit.
it's taunting
Yeah,
in a
exactly. Like
way.
they're being bullies.
Yes.
I mean, I'm laughing about bullying a woman, but because, again, this isn't something that really happened to her. Thankfully, Cindy has spoken about it, so it's not like, yeah, Prince and his posse came up to me and they were pressuring me to join him in the VIP section, and I was really uncomfortable. No, we don't have any
Yeah.
stories about that. So, whether it's basically fiction as far as we can tell. Okay, then moving on to the next verse. This one's an interesting one. "Superfine heifer, I saw you in the Vogue. I knew you would be trouble from word go. I'll give you 7 sips of elderberry wine. Maybe we'll unlock the secrets of your mind." Okay, Rhonda, help me out here. Help me out here. Superfine. Okay, I get that.
Hmm.
Heifer. So I've always understood heifer as a slang term to mean somebody who's overweight or maybe slovenly, or it's usually negative, right? I mean,
Hmm.
isn't it usually negative?
It typically is, but I think a lot of times when we're talking about AAVE, African American Vernacular English, um, or just kind of Black cultural speak, we can use certain terms, and heifer would be one of them, Like I know from my own experience, I might, be listening to somebody and be like, that heifer is singing her face off. And it's the way it's said, it's the intonations and so forth. So I think in this case, he's not using it. It would almost be akin to irresistible bitch. Like we all understand that bitch is an offensive term, but that there are ways that we use it in how we, in pop culture conversation, if you will, where it's understood by inflection and intonation and context to not be offensive, or it's not meant to be offensive. It's actually meant to be a term of endearment or empowerment.
Mhm.
So I think in this case, he's using it in the sense of instead of saying this super fine bitch, which in the context of it's a model, it's Prince, it's this, that, and the other, we would understand it that it's not meant to mean, bitch in the offensive sense, but it's still, I mean, why say that instead of saying woman? you know,
Well,
because
yeah, I
woman,
mean,
syllabically, woman would have fit too, But
yeah,
again, I think it adds a little bit of um, maybe some humor and a little bit of just kind of contemporary language.
yeah.
But I don't think that he meant it in a harmful way.
No, I can't imagine either. And context is everything. So I never heard it to be negative because I mean, she's super fine. I mean, that's how he leads it
Right?
off. So
Super
to
fine.
use that to lead off, the adjective, and then to say that she's a heifer, you just have to understand, like, okay, in the context of this phrase, it's all positive. Like he's meaning it in
Right.
a good way.
Yeah.
It's just I had never really heard personally. I never heard heifer used too often in a positive way when somebody's referring to somebody else. But certainly, I'm not listening to a lot of people talk about other people and call them heifers. Period. So I don't have a lot of experience with it. So I'm
Yeah,
sure
it's
that it's
not a
happened.
word that he used that I am familiar with him using very often in other songs.
No, makes the song unique though. It's certainly a line that sticks out, and I think it's a line a lot of people remember from this song. I would say. Then we got the references to Vogue, and kind of already alluded to that. I looked it up because I was kind of curious how many Vogue covers did Cindy Crawford have about the time that the song would have been recorded. So in 1986, she had three Vogue covers in 1986, and in 1987 alone, she had 11. Man, so she was all over Vogue in
Wow.
those 2 years. I mean, especially in '87, but starting off in '86, she would have been like 20. I forget if she was born in 65 or 66. I don't recall. Google would tell me that, but regardless, she was very young. And yeah, but by 87, 11 covers of Vogue. So she was all over, this was basically starting her ubiquity in pop culture. And I think it was only like a couple years later she was on MTV on that House of Style show. I don't know if you remember that at all. I
Oh
never
my
really
gosh,
watched
yes,
it,
I
but
do.
yeah, it was kind of a big deal there for a while on MTV, and then she was on Super Bowl halftime commercial with Pepsi for she was promoting Pepsi, and
She was everywhere.
she
Oh
was
my
everywhere
gosh.
for a little bit, and I think it was really starting to ramp up here about '87, as evidenced by the number of covers she got, and then shortly after that, her MTV gig, and then she married Richard Gere, so she was kind of attached to a famous actor, and then anyway, so then she started branching out into acting herself. But yeah,
Yeah.
just making a comment about that because he does mention her, seeing her in Vogue. I saw you in the Vogue, as he says. I knew you would be trouble from the word go, and this is where I just kind of take that to mean he knew that she was, basically going to be trouble for him to ignore, like somebody who's difficult to ignore because of her beauty and I guess he just saw something, must have, or he's saying that he saw something in her that makes him think, man, I'm gonna be thinking about this woman for a while. That she's gonna be trouble for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm still stuck on the number of covers that she had just in that short period of time. It's amazing. And
Yeah,
again, like I said, she was kind of everywhere, so you didn't even necessarily pay attention to, it's like, oh, it's Cindy Crawford. Like we just became accustomed to seeing her. That's pretty dope.
yeah, and I guess models. by design, especially before they become supermodels, they're not supposed. I mean, you're not supposed to necessarily notice them specifically. Like they're supposed to be almost like blank slates, right?
Yes, like, and that was kind of the whole fascination with the evolution of the supermodel, is that we knew their names and we knew everything about them. I mean, they really were kind of the precursor to the internet influencers that we have now. They're like,
Yeah.
but it was pretty fascinating to start out, kind of not knowing most of the time who a model was. You knew their faces, but nothing else. They were silent. And then they become spokespeople and brand ambassadors. And obviously they're still models, but we hear their voices and we know their names and we get to know their personalities. That was a cool time.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. And I do wanted to bring out the elderberry wine reference because Prince, again, doesn't make a lot of references to alcohol in his songs.
Mm-hmm.
Not a ton, not a ton. I mean, it's not like he never did, but he didn't do it a lot. And when he did do it, of course, it was going to be, pre-JW. But I think like I could come up with pre-1986, 87, just a couple of notable examples. Um, I'll bring the music, baby. You bring the wine from just as long as we're together.
Yeah.
And then the references to banana daiquiris and another Lonely Christmas, but there might be others. I didn't spend a lot of time diving into the number of different alcohol references Prince had in his music pre-1987, but this is just another one. I'll give you 7 sips of elderberry wine. Of course, have to mention 7 because that's Prince's number. Too many references to the number 7 to really kind of cite and count here, but just know anybody who's listening that 7 wasn't an accident.
And also, was he referencing Manischewitz? Like what? Because in my mind, when you say elderberry wine, I'm like, first of all, it does not sound delicious, and it does not sound sophisticated.
No,
It
no,
sounds
me
like.
neither.
So what exactly is he talking about? Again, only Prince knows what he meant there, but it's a weird, curious reference.
Yeah, agreed. It's a little out there. I mean,
Like what?
I don't even know if I've ever had elderberry wine, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said, in referencing Manischewitz, that's the first thing that came to my mind. And I've had that, but again, that's not something that I would think that Prince would just have sitting in his hotel suite. Why would that be there?
7 sips
These
of it,
are
though.
the things that I would have loved to have been able to ask him if I'd ever had a chance to interview him. Like, let's talk about this. This is
Yeah,
strange. Tell me.
yeah.
So,
And then the lines, maybe we'll unlock the secrets of your mind, almost just kind of telling me he's
mm,
just trying to get her drunk. That's just like his fancy way of
yeah,
saying, I'd like to get you a little tipsy. Maybe not drunk. I mean, only seven sips. Probably not
seven
going to get her
sips.
drunk. But then again, those models don't weigh a whole lot and they don't eat a whole lot. So maybe 7 sips is enough.
And loosen her up. I mean, I think unfortunately in our contemporary understandings, we recognize that as not necessarily being the most generous thing to do. But there are so many pop culture references to, sipping something or smoking something or taking something to loosen up or giving it to someone to loosen them up, help them relax, whatever.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go so far as to say again that it's harmless, because again, certainly in a contemporary context, it doesn't feel, it feels creepy. It doesn't feel lovely, but it also kind of tracks with so much else that we've heard in rock and roll throughout the history of the genre. So it kind of fits in with other thematic ideas in music that we hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, because that's really what it's all about. It isn't great, but it is what it is. And there's a lot of examples of that. And this is just another one on top of the pile and pile of examples of, and it's not just music. I mean, you said pop culture, so it's in books, it's in films and TV shows. Hey, take a drink of this and relax, calm down, and that's kind of what it's intended to say, I think. All right, so then the chorus again is the same. Cindy C, play with me. And that's the background. Will you play with me? I'll pay the fee. So I don't think we need to talk about that again. Then we get to what I guess on the lyric sheet is called an interlude. And this is kind of where there's some lines that, again, there's Prince singing, and then you hear some background stuff. So the passion's in the mix. Then in the background, you hear, serve it up, Sheila. Drink it quick. Cindy, shit, where'd you get that beauty mark? Maybe you and I should be undressing. Don't all girls look the same? They don't? Oh, what a shame. Cindy, Cindy, I'll pay the usual fee. What's the matter? Don't you like me? And I think somebody in the background saying, then help me, tell me what it's all about. And then he goes right into the next verse, but we'll take a pause there. So here, I did want to bring up the serve it up Sheila. I want to mention that because I got to think that that's a reference to Sheila E.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in just the previous song in Le Grind, there's the serve it up Frankie line, which I'd already talked about on that episode about who's that referencing. So I just think it's kind of fun, like in back-to-back songs, you have somebody saying serve it up, comma, somebody's name.
Yes, and of course, I'm sure you covered this with Le Grind, but serve it up Frankie is in reference to Frankie Knuckles.
Yeah. Yep.
And then, of course, I absolutely agree that serve it up Sheila is Kat talking to Sheila, and then we get a really, nice drum solo from Sheila. So it's like it's a directive, a studio directive, if you will, as well as actually just kind of part of the banter in the song. And I think you've got some interesting play with Kat and Sheila and Prince and all of that happening in the song, both lyrically and musically.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think starting off this little section of lines with the passions in the mix, drink it quick, I think that's still referring to the elderberry wine that he's having her sip. So it's just kind of like this whole concept of her taking a few sips of alcohol is, what he's trying to, is going on here in the song. He's wanting her to drink up those 7 sips of elderberry wine. But yeah, the where'd you get that beauty mark line is another one of those very clear references to Cindy Crawford. I mean, that was kind of one of her more distinguishing features that people really could identify for her, was the beauty mark that she had on her face. So again, if you weren't sure who this song was about and you start listening to it, it becomes very clear with some of these lines for sure. I like the don't all girls look the same. They don't. What a shame line, because I just think it's kind of his really kind of weird way of paying her a very high compliment. It's an interesting way to compliment somebody. Like they don't look the same. Okay, Cindy's maybe a little more beautiful than the average woman. And it's like he's having a conversation again with himself where you don't hear anything. So if he's saying, don't all girls look the same? They don't. I mean, is she supposed to be saying, no, I'm more beautiful than most women? That would be kind of a weird thing for her to do. I don't know.
Yes,
maybe unless he's talking to his guys again, his crew.
I've always heard that line kind of as him sort of playfully addressing the woman, whether it's Cindy, again, Cindy for real, obviously, maybe not, but, you and I should be undressing. Don't all girls look the same? They don't. Oh, what a shame. It almost feels like a slick compliment, oh, everyone is not as beautiful as you. Oh my God. Like something along those lines, but it's how I've always heard it. Again, yeah. It's definitely a departure from how we typically hear Prince referring to women and engaging with women in his lyrics most of the time. So yeah. It's definitely, it's an outlier in that sense, but I think that it's just kind of a little playful banter between him and this person. Yeah. This Cindy person.
It's clever. I like it. But then he has to kind of ruin it with I'll pay the usual fee. What's the matter? Don't you like me? So he's like really kind of, complimenting her, and he's starting to think like, okay, maybe this is going to work out. Maybe he doesn't have to be quite so crude. But then you get at the very end, the line about, paying her, and you have to assume that she's if you're envisioning how the song is playing out in real time, you have to envision like it's not going so well for him at this
Right.
point.
It does not sound like he's winning a lot of points with this lady.
Yeah. What's the matter? Don't you like me? I mean, typically that is not something you would say to somebody if you are feeling like they're into you, or it's the interaction's going well, or if you're getting a mutual vibe back. I mean, this is
Yeah.
it very much feels like he's really aggressively pursuing her, and she's either playing hard to get or is, giving him vibes that she's not interested, not engaging him in the same way that a woman who would be very interested in him would do, possibly like just kind of, turning around talking to her friends, or just not really paying him the attention that he's expecting or thinks that he has earned at this point, which again makes this song a little bit more problematic in a modern context, as we've talked about.
Absolutely. And and again, it doesn't really fit with other narratives, that we have of his. We very seldom really hear Prince engaging in a way where it seems like he's not going to get the girl. Now, of course, there's plenty of songs where he's lost the girl he got, excuse me, but not in the sense of I'm actively pursuing and she's like, no. The closest I
Yeah,
can even think of it is in Pete, where he says, she's so cool and I'm so ugly. But still, he's not aggressively, going after. He's just kind of admiring her from afar,
yeah,
where here it's very in your face.
yeah. Prince is striking out. He's striking out on the song,
Yeah, man.
and he doesn't like it at all. He doesn't
No.
like it, and it does make this song that much more interesting, though, because how boring is it to hear somebody write a song always about how amazing they are at picking up women? That gets a little old.
Right.
I, it does endear the song a bit to me, because again, most men strike out at some point in their life. I can't imagine every man who's ever pursued a woman, or pursued another man for that matter, always being 100% success rate. That just is not realistic. So, I mean, yeah, most people don't write songs about their failures, but I think there's room for it. There's certainly room for, writing songs about successes and failures. And this is maybe a song about a potential romantic failure that Prince is singing about, which makes it fascinating to
Absolutely.
me.
And to your point, even more fascinating is that if none of this happened in real life, but he's just kind of thinking about what if I had actually, tried to, and this is probably what have happened, she would have been like, please get out of my face. Like that even he might have a sense of humor about himself to imagine that if he had tried to pursue her, it would have gone just so dramatically bad.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I think, in imagining the worst case scenario, if you will, where this rock star, which is clearly what he was by that point, is approaching this beautiful supermodel and attempts to get her attention and her affection, and he just gets totally kicked to the curb, and then he goes and writes a song about what if that had really happened, since it's rather doubtful that it did.
So yeah, no, I think that that's a good point, and I like the imagery of Prince just kind of envisioning that I met her, I danced with her, but I didn't really pursue it. Maybe his own insecurities stepped in and was like, "Yeah, I don't know. She's a really young, budding supermodel. Do you have what it takes?" And let me write a song about a situation that could have potentially happened if I would have, like, if we would have played this out. This is one potential outcome.
Yes.
And how would I react to that? And the answer to that is not great. Not great. People don't like rejection. Nobody likes to be rejected. So, I mean, I guess if it's better to, I guess in my opinion, it's better to write a song about rejection where than actually doing some of these things in real life. Like
Yes.
if you need an outlet to get off some frustrations, that's what art's for, right? It certainly can be for that. All right, so the next verse, I'm talking about a long, crucial wait. Girl, if I have to beg, I'm going to see you in your birthday suit tonight. I'm sure you're quite intelligent. A whiz at math and all that shit. but I'm a tad more interested in flying your kite tonight. Cindy, is that all right? Then he says, "Oh, Cindy C, will you play with me? I'll pay the usual fee." This one's interesting. I like this one again because he's singing like in his lower register here, but you have another woman's vocals in the background. Sounds like Cat to me, but I'm not 100% sure. So this song, this section of the song is a little bit chaotic because you have a lot of things going on. You
So
got Prince's
chaotic.
vocals. You got Prince's vocals that I just spoke to. But in the background, you have again who I think is Cat saying things like, "Cindy C, listen, she's so tired. Look at me. She doesn't look as good as I do. You think she does? But think again." And okay, really what I need to do is I need to read the lines each one because they're almost like responses. So if he says, "I'm talking about a long crucial wait," she says, "Cindy C, listen. Girl, if I have to beg, she's so tired. I'm gonna see you in. Look at me. Your birthday suit tonight. She doesn't look as good as I do. I'm sure you're quite intelligent. You think she does? But I think again, see. A whiz at math and all that shit? How about that? But I'm a tad more interested. Haha, look. She can't even walk in those shoes. I can walk better than that. I like that one's funny. She can't even walk in those shoes. I can walk better than that. And that's probably referring to like some, high heels or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In flying your kite tonight, she can't even dance. Cindy, is that all right? I would give something to know how she ever sees anyone. Uh, so anyway, yeah, very chaotic, but fascinating because Prince wrote all that. It's not like well, I assume Cat didn't just ad lib that stuff. So he's kind of like playing this or trying to maybe portray a situation like in Purple Rain where Jill Jones was the woman in the back admiring the kid, but all the kid could see was Apollonia. It almost
Right.
feels a little bit like this. You've got this woman who's kind of putting Cindy down, the Cindy C of the song, putting her down in order to kind of make herself like shine a little brighter in the narrator's viewpoint. That's what I get from it a little bit.
Absolutely. I've always liked this part of the songs. One, from a lyrical perspective, it very much resituates Prince in 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 his element, where he's like, I'm a beg, I want you, I'm just going to lay it all out there on the line. And it doesn't feel quite as invasive as some of the other lyrics of the song. It kind of puts him back in his I'm in control of the situation, but really she's in control of me. And whatever she wants me to do, I'm going to do it so that, she will let me see her in her birthday suit. But it also evokes a lot of the imagery in the play between Prince and Cat at the time. So if you think back to like the You Got the Look video where she's trying to get his attention and he's talking and singing with Sheena Easton, and at the end of it, she drags him up the stairs, and there's that competitiveness where Cat, either in real life or as the caricature that they've created, the persona they've created for her within the context of the band, is always trying to get Prince's attention, always trying to show that she's the better dancer, she's prettier, she's finer, she's hotter, whatever. And that's exactly what you're hearing here. And so whether that's meant to really be Cat, I think that it is Cat saying the lines, but
Yeah, it
whether it's
sounds
meant
like it.
to really be her for real, or just kind of another woman who's in the moment where this is this whole thing is playing out, who's like she's not all that. I mean, it's something that happens in real life, where the guy or the girl you're interested in is completely distracted by some other person, and you're sitting there thinking, they can't do blah blah blah. And I love, I'm sure you're quite intelligent, a whiz at math and all that shit. The way he sings that is so funny to me. He's like, listen, sure that you got it, 800 on your math SATs or whatever, but tonight, don't care about that. You might be brilliant, but there is only one thing that I'm focused on. And to me, that's very funny. Again, it kind of puts Prince back in the lyrical space that we're accustomed to, where he's like, I'm going to learn all of these things about you. Yes, yes, you're smart. You went to Harvard. Oh, great. But take your clothes off. Like right now, let's just focus on this one thing. And there is some something that's a little bit, to me, humorous about that, so long as it's not, again, in the same aggressive, invasive sense of some of the other lyrics of the song.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I like this verse so much, because it is more humorous. And then, of course, another metaphor that I've really never heard before. I'm a tad more interested in flying your kite tonight. Okay.
Yeah, I've never heard that used in reference to sex ever.
Nope. Nope. Me neither. But he got, he's pretty creative when it comes to those metaphors for sex. We should almost make a coffee table book of metaphors for sex by Prince.
That would be amazing.
that'll be my post podcast project. Okay, yeah, that verse is fun, and that does lighten the mood a little bit. And then we get, I think he says, 2 organ solos to go, which doesn't really have a lot of meaning in terms of the lyrics of the song. It's just kind of like just a reference to the music. We have some more Cindy C's, lots of I will pay the usual fee, that kind of stuff. Before we get into the bridge, and I think the bridge is where he's doing this kind of spoken word thing, a very common trope in Prince music. Excuse my savoir-faire, but baby, I'm dying to take you everywhere. I want to show you to my friends, because baby, you're the living end. Let me have a debt worth winning. I can feel your ice is thinning, like a frozen pond in spring. Your furry melting thing awaits me. Your furry melting thing awaits me. In my 6th string. Okay. All right. So just right the very first line, excuse my savoir-faire, is interesting, because I always take savoir-faire when it's used like in this context to mean like sophistication and then suave, and just to be like I'm very socially adept.
Mm-hmm.
So excuse my suaveness. Excuse me for being so sophisticated. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just his way of saying excuse me for being so forward. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's curious, because I've always wondered, did he misuse the word unknowingly, or, to your point, was he trying to kind of say excuse the fact that I'm so fly and I'm so which
Right.
is completely on brand for Prince, and I would not at all be surprised if he knew exactly what he was doing with using such an interesting turn of phrase there. This part of the song has always made me a little bit like, because again, like I was like 12 or 13 when I first heard it. I'm like, you're furry, what? That
Yeah.
that imagery, I was like, that's not you.
Yeah,
And even now,
it's pretty cringy.
it's pretty cringy. And even now at age 46, I'm like, I feel like if a guy said that to me, I'd be like, you know what, let's do this another time when you can manage yourself better, because that's not sexy. But again, it works it works not because it's brilliant or intriguing or nuanced, but considering the rest of the album, it's on par. The thing about the Black Album is that it just completely, Prince leaves all of his sophistication and his ability to be evocative with imagery, and he kind of goes. The whole album is very on the nose. It's not subtle. It's not nuanced. It's not really higher level of writing. So it works in the context of the album, but it is cringy as all get out. Still, all these years later.
Yeah, it is for sure. And he repeats it, so it's like he really was selling that line. Your furry melting thing awaits me, and then
Like,
to
that's just
follow that up,
gross.
and then to follow that up with in my 6th string. Okay, is
Yes.
that again a euphemism for his penis? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's obviously
Probably.
a reference to a guitar, but when said right behind your furry melting thing awaits me, it gives me the impression that he's also referring to his dick, basically.
Yeah. And obviously, if you think of the imagery from the late 70s, early 80s with the, guitar that quote unquote ejaculated. And I think that he often used his guitar, and particularly the neck of it and the motion that your hands make on the neck of the guitar, to be euphemisms for body parts. So for
Yep.
sure.
Yep. Absolutely. The "Let Me Have a Debt Worth Winning, I Can Feel Your Ice is Thinning, like a frozen pond in spring." That feels a little more poetic. I mean, that just kind of tells me that he thinks that she's warming up to him.
Mm-hmm.
But then, yeah, then he just forget all that poetic, all this poetic language. I'm gonna put all that aside now for my next couple of lines about the furry melting thing. So nice try, nice try. It's like A for effort for the first few, and then nope, had to go bring it back down to the crude level meter.
Yes, yes. It's like it's
Uh,
really basic.
really basic. So yeah, just kind of goes to show that like he can write very descriptive and, as you mentioned, evocative language when he wants to, and when he doesn't want to, or he doesn't feel like it fits the song or at least the project that he's putting out there, he can get crude as hell too. So he's got both in him, and we knew this. We already knew this anyway, but this is a great example of it. Cindy, where are you? Come on, Cindy. Come on, Cindy. Don't you want to play with me? Don't you want to play with me? What's the matter with me? And then he's yelling that. So at this point, this is where I feel like he sounds a little more deranged. Like he's so distraught that Cindy is not interested in him, that he's like almost like crying. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's yelling and screaming and crying and acting like a spoiled brat.
Yes, yes.
Like he's not getting his way. What's the matter with me, Cindy? Either that, or else he feels like so destroyed by this rejection that it's almost like he's can't rebound from it. Like it's just too much.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting because again, we don't really hear that a lot from him throughout, his entire repertoire, but we get a little hint of it later in, Thieves of the Temple, where he's like, you said you loved me. You said I was your baby. But again, that's a very different, the song is different. It's not the same. This sounds like he's chasing her and she's terrified and trying to get away, and he's just yelling like a maniac. So it definitely devolves and doesn't really feel like a healthy response to rejection,
No.
for sure. And it doesn't it doesn't really. I think maybe a lot of these elements that we're discussing probably contribute to my not feeling much affection for this song. I don't dislike it, but I certainly don't crave listening to it over and over. It's chaotic and it's wild and it's it's uncomfortable. At this point,
Mhm.
it's like, why is he? Because normally, if somebody is rejecting Prince, which again is not necessarily something we hear about a lot through his own lens, he kind of goes and does something else. He'll go literally, he's like, I'm just going to go play my guitar. I'm going to go, call someone else. I've got some other girls that I can call. But here, he's very insistent and desperate. And I think it's interesting because we don't hear that from him a lot. But again, it becomes the way it's played out here. It's really troubling the more you listen to it. He definitely sounds unhinged.
Yeah,
And
it's an unhealthy obsession is what it comes across
yes,
as.
yes, an unhealthy obsession. So, and I'm very grateful that throughout pretty much the rest of his career and even prior to this, there's not a lot of that.
No.
It's not something that was a recurring theme for him.
Yeah, I can't imagine Prince having the same uh, level of women followers, like not followers, like literally, but like people who listen to his music. If a lot of his music was this dark and this kind of disturbing,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of his interactions with women, I can imagine
Yeah,
that being like a serious turn off to his music. If this was kind of like the way he presented his relationships with women, the majority of the time, as opposed to a
right.
very small minority, which Cindy C makes up.
Right. And we know, I mean, obviously, he was human like everybody else and had his frailties and insecurities like everyone else. And I do feel like as a songwriter and as an artist, he explored those quite a bit in his music. But I also wonder, especially now that we have more backstory about the Black Album than we did in, the mid 80s and even in the 90s when it was re-released, if some of what we're hearing is his way of exploring those darker parts of himself that he normally doesn't bring fully to the surface. Because he did say, and the whole reason he didn't want to put the album out was that it was so dark and it was not what he wanted to be the last thing that people heard of him. And so maybe that's kind of what all of this is. It was just the purging of that energy and that space wherever he was, the anger and frustration, and whether or not any of these songs are truly autobiographical or just coming from a different creative mind space, but they are dark and they are edgy in a way that's not innovative so much as it's like, oh, okay, you should speak to someone, like that's for your journal. It's not for public consumption. But in all seriousness, it does also sound like kind of the working out of that kind of energy in a very unusual space, whereas most of us would probably write it down or speak to someone about it, and Prince is like,
Yeah.
well, no, I'm just going to put it on a record. Why not? I put everything else out, put this out too. So
Yeah. And just like a lot of stuff that happens in the moment, it feels like the right thing, but then in the quote unquote sober light of day, you look back like, I don't know. I don't know.
yeah,
I felt okay when I was purging. Like the purging felt really euphoric and healthy, and even though some of the stuff that I was singing about, but I had to get it out of me, and I got it out of me on these 8 songs. But now that I've had a few months or I've had some time to reflect on it, I mean, if I had some really kind of dark poems or drawing, let's say I was an artist and I had some really kind of evil looking or dark looking or disturbing images that I had drawn or painted, and then I've had a chance to look at it in response or in reflection, I didn't want people to kind of like, that's what you're about now. And anytime you put out a piece of art, that's the latest thing. That's what you're about.
yeah,
That's now what you're about. It doesn't matter what you did before. You're currently about this. And
yes,
so I get why he didn't want people to think he was currently about this, even though it might have been healthy for him to get this out here, get this out on, in his music on this album. To release it for wide consumption, maybe in his mind was not what, and I guess that's kind of what he was articulating, I guess, by saying it's not the one thing I want people to remember me by. I don't want it to be my last. If I was to die tomorrow, I don't want this to be my last artistic statement, because it's not really intended to be like where I'm at now. It was where I was
yeah,
at when I recorded it, but now I'm onto this new thing. So let me just follow that. And that was, of course, Love Sexy. So
yes.
yeah, so thank you for kind of helping kind of put some language to that, as an artist yourself, how that feels to put something out there that may seem dark, but you don't necessarily want everybody to experience it with you as you're creating it.
Yeah, I definitely, again, thinking about it now, all these years after he's left us, I would have loved, if I had had a chance to talk to him about his music, which was something that I had on my, list of things that I definitely wanted while I was doing a lot of blogging and music journalism. I would have wanted to engage in a conversation with him about processing hurt, because we hear it a lot in his music, obviously, but this album in particular, considering where it falls, after the dissolution of the revolution and all of these other things that have kind of happened between 86 and 88, all of that, it seems like there's a lot of stuff that he's exorcising here on the Black Album. And I just think it would have been interesting to have been able to hear directly from him in a more direct manner than what he did offer about the Black Album at the time, as to where those songs came from and why he decided to record them, and what really, changed his mind about putting it out. even though it came out anyway, you know?
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, that would have made for a very, very fascinating interview, and ultimately, you know, I think a lot of us have the same questions, and we would love to know that.
Absolutely.
So there's one last really kind of piece of lyrics for the song. I'm actually not going to read it because, first of all, one, it's a rap by Cat. Cat Glover does this rap. This
Mm-hmm.
music is the key to set yourself free rap. Number two, I guess it's the story goes this is plagiarized, so
Mm-hmm.
it's not even written by Prince or Cat. It's from a song from an artist named J.M. Silk called
Mm-hmm.
"Music Is the Key" that was released in 1985. So there's like a house version, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
a shorter version, and the house version is the one that contains this rap in it. So back when this song was recorded, I guess the way the story goes, Prince did not know that this was not an original rap that was written and recorded for the song. He didn't, I guess, realize that this was kind of lifted from this "Music Is the Key" song. And so when the Black Album did not come out, he must have liked this enough to have it, or thought it was going to be part of the Love Sexy album, as included with the song Positivity. But then, that album was supposed to come out. And it's like, wait a second, this is actually a rap that's been done before. And so if you're going to put this on here, we got to give this musician royalties and yada yada yada, get his permission. So they just scrapped the whole thing. But yeah, it's a little interesting, like footnote to this rap. And so Cat did have to change. So a couple lines I'll read here, because in the rap he goes, "The beat won't stop till the JM rocks," which back when when I was listening to this and I had no idea who JM Silk was or Music Is the Key, of course I didn't know what JM meant for or stood for,
Yeah, me
because
neither. Me
this
neither.
Cat could have been CG, if it's Cat, or PRN for Prince Rogers Nelson, but she says the JM Jocks because that was not a line that was changed to fit the song. But that's of course referring to the original writers. And then the last line of the song: "So to ease your mind and set yourself free to the mystifying music that we call Cindy C." And then that, of course, is not part of the original song. How it ends is the mystifying music that we call the key. So that was an easy, one for one switch there, to make it fit the song Cindy C. But everything else is pretty much the same from the rap, from the Music Is the Key.
Mm-hmm. That
Were you familiar? You weren't familiar with that song back in the day, were you?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I had no real understanding or even exposure to house music until sometime in the 90s, probably, much later. So, probably like a lot of people who were ignorant at the time, I figured that Cat or Prince wrote that rap. And I actually love that part of the song because, one, the the music changes. You get the horn swell and kind of a different feeling. It feels more positive. It feels light when the whole rest of the song does not. But in the context of the song, it's bizarre because it does not fit the rest of the song
Nope.
until you get to the end, to your point, where she references Cindy C. What I'm curious about is, it's a great rap, and Kat delivers it very convincingly, which I think is part of the reason that those of us who had never heard of the song previously would never even have thought that it was from some other source. But how did she not know that that was probably not the best thing to do? To take a whole, because it's not even like just, it's not even like it's just Kat saying music is the key and Prince just looped it. It's literally the entire piece of text from
Hmm.
another written and recorded piece of intellectual property. And it's fascinating to me that she wouldn't have known as an artist not to do that. It's not necessarily unusual that Prince didn't have, familiarity with the song. He didn't know everything. But again, it's just weird that at no point during any of this did anybody say, who wrote this or where did this come from?
Yeah.
Um, until it gets back around to potentially being included in Positivity on Love Sexy, which I'm trying to think of how that would have even sounded, and it doesn't seem like that would have been cool. So, um, I like that part of the song because again, it changes the energy of the song. But at the same time, it's a very bizarre revelation that it was lifted from a whole other piece of work, not credited, not acknowledged that it didn't belong to the creators of this work, and then it's just kind of an afterthought. It's a very strange thing, especially for somebody like Prince, again, who was always so staunchly aware, even before the era of the symbol and the back and forth with Warner Brothers, who seemed to really always have a very clear understanding of ownership and that kind of musical integrity. For there to be a whole piece of someone else's song that was inserted into his without credit and without acknowledgement is really strange.
It is.
Even if it was not intentional, but again, Kat knew that that was not her
Oh,
lyrics.
right, right.
Like shit.
No.
It'd be like if I go into the studio and I'm gonna sing a hook on somebody's song and I just start singing "I Want to Be Your Lover," and that person, because they might be Gen Z and so they've never heard "I Want to Be Your Lover," but I know that I didn't write that song.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, it is. It is. And putting it on a Prince song as if this artist J.M. Silk was never going to hear it and not be like, "Oh wait, that's not Prince's. He didn't write that. Where did that come from?"
Uh-huh.
It was going to come back and bite him in the ass eventually if this would have came out as planned. So it was maybe for the best. But anyway, it is neither here nor there. It's just one of the I don't know. I chalk it up to a whole lot of naivety and maybe some ignorance to, I mean, Kat was a dancer. She just kind of got thrust into the music business, but maybe she just wasn't as astute in terms of like some of these copyright laws and just,
True.
intellectual property and stuff like that. I'm just making up, I'm just making up stuff. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that it was an intentional, oh, I'm just going to, it's like, oh, I was inspired by this, so we're just going to drop it in. Because if you think about it, if they had been performing this song live, it would have been totally normal, really, to interpolate something else into it. I do that all the time in live shows. There are songs where my band and I used to do Marvin Gaye's Inner City Blues. And there's a part where they're just kind of, playing the groove, and I drop in the chorus of the Rainbow Children because it works. It's just kind of to fill the space as a really interesting ad lib. And we do that in live performance. But to go into the studio and record it that way, it's like that's that's a whole other conversation. And
Yeah.
again, I don't necessarily think that Kat was, deliberately doing anything deceptive, but it's like, but you didn't write that, and probably maybe should have said something. Maybe. Who knows? Anyway.
Bottom line, yes. Yes, absolutely. Okay, well, that pretty much brings us to the end of the song then, Rhonda. Prince will then say, "Oh, Cindy C, won't you play with me one last time?" before transitioning to the next song of the album. So I have no more lyrics to really kind of speak about or talk to. So do you have any final thoughts on the song that we haven't already covered?
No, despite it being a little bit lyrically bizarre and cringy at points, I still think that it's a fun song to dance to. And I appreciate that it's a song that exists that kind of makes you have to ask some higher level questions about Prince and his thought process and his writing process, because it is a little bit of a departure from what we have in the rest of his repertoire. But again, I think that within the context of the Black Album and the themes that he was potentially exploring with those songs, it fits right in.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree with that. It fits right in on this album. I'm glad he didn't like try to take it and put it on a different album, because I don't think it would have made the same impact, and it really would have stuck out like a sore thumb on Love Sexy. Can you imagine the song being on Love Sexy? I can't.
No, no, not at all. I can't think of anywhere where any of these other songs would have made sense. Like, I would really have to spend some time listening to each of them and thinking, where else could this have gone where it would have actually made some kind of creative sense or but you know.
Yeah, When Two Are in Love is the only one, of course, and that's the only one he did. So
Correct.
absolutely. Okay, well, Rhonda, where can people find you? Do you have anything you want to promote on the show at this point?
Oh, well, thank you. I have tons of music out there in the universe. It's on all of the popular streaming services and on Bandcamp. Bandcamp, that sounded like cap. So if you go on to that website and search Rhonda Nicole, you'll find me. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So I'm everywhere. Rhonda Nicole Music. And rhondanicole.com is my website. So that might be the easiest place to go and find all of the relevant links for where my music and thoughts exist on the internet.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rhonda, for joining me on this episode. It's
Thank
wonderful
you.
bouncing this weird ass song around with you. I think we did it justice, and hopefully Cindy Crawford will someday listen to this episode and yeah, it's a weird song. It's a weird
Yes.
song. I don't know if I'm flattered or creeped out by it, but it's a weird song.
For sure. Thank you, as always, for having me on. I always enjoy having the chance to chat with you and talk about Prince's music. So this has been great.
You're welcome so much. This has been the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I've been your host, Jason Brenninger. You can follow the show at Press Rewind Pod on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Got shows on YouTube, so check it out there. And until next time, goodbye.